Hey, it's me. Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined by Mr. Jerry Bradley. He is a retired music executive. He's had a long list of achievements. He's engineered, produced records. He became the head of RCA Nashville in 1973. Some of the many artists his career has intersected with would include Charley Pride, Alabama, Dolly Parton, Ronnie Milsap, Willie Nelson, and Waylon Jennings. That's just the tip of the iceberg. In 2019, Jerry Bradley was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, an honor he shares with his father, Owen Bradley, and his uncle, Harold Bradley. He's a man with a great story. Mr. Jerry Bradley, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I didn't realize all that had happened.
So how are you, sir?
I'm doing pretty good for an old-timer. But thank God for serious music. Radio, I kind of like that. That lets you keep for what generation you want to listen to.
I'm a fan of Sirius XM myself. What channels do you find yourself listening to?
Outlaw, country, and country, and I hate to admit it, but I do listen to more talk than I really should.
I hear you. Well, you were born in Nashville. What are your earliest memories of growing up in the Bradley house?
Going to WSM radio with my father and, sitting in the audience while he was in the band. And he worked up there on radio, Noontime Neighbors, and Sunday down south. And we'd have barbecues with a guy named Snooky Lanson. I don't know if you've ever heard of Snooky, but Snooky was on the hit parade, and he did very well. He went on to New York, and he wasn't necessarily a country star, but he was a great singer. And, those things, hanging around the radio studio, WSM, I remember that. And then that led to recording studios my dad built. And he had about 3 or 4 of those. And I was in at least 3 of them. In the last one, Bradley's Barn, I was involved in helping. I didn't do a lot of building. I wasn't a carpenter, but I took some part in helping him get that thing going. Bradley's
Barn is a pretty legendary. I mean, it's a place people have talked about. There's even an album that was done in tribute to it.
Yeah.
I'm hoping you can tell us, how would you describe this place, Bradley's Barn?
Well, it was an old barn, and he bought it, and they had cows in it for years, and he knocked the ends out of it and hired a bulldozer to clean it out, and then he got a contractor to come up and put a concrete floor in it and put some wire cables across it to keep it from splitting under pressure. And it was actually an old barn. And he put it, when he put it back together, he put it, my dad, like a dead studio, not a live studio, something you can control the sound on. And that's where I came from. Because other studios were live. Studio B, for instance, at RCA had a different sound to it, had a tinny sound to it, and nothing wrong with that. But I learned and really helped fix one of the RCA studios back with a dead sound. It sounded more like the barn than Studio B, and I'm not taking anything away from Studio B because many hit records were cut in RCA Studio B. And but it was a dead room, and used a lot of baffles around instruments so you could keep the channels clean without drum leakage or something leakage on the microphones. But that's what it was, and we made it things. There wasn't any modern colored burlap at that time. My dad knew people made burlap bags, believe it or not, in Nashville. And I remember going down buying rolls of burlap, brown burlap, from these people that I can't think of their name, but owned burlap company bags that they put feed and seed in. And anyhow, so he went down and bought the burlap, and it hired a carpenter and told him to put it on 42 inches and on centers. And the carpenter thought it was crazy because most people put those things on 18 inches or some other number. I'm not real sure what it was, but anyhow, he said, well, that ain't going to work. The seam's not going to be right. My dad told him, said, I don't care what the seams are. Put it on 42. And so he did. And then my dad took strips of wood and covered the seams. And so the walls were basically insulation and burlap bags and, well, burlap material, not bags. It was a big roll of it. And anyhow, he was very conscious of what went into the microphone. He wanted to control that. So as time moved on, went from 2-track to 3-track to 4-track to 16-track or 8-track to 16-track. Well, he was way ahead because he had control of all the instruments, and he was doing that different than anybody in town at that time. But that's what him let you control the sound. And he gave me the opportunity. I got back out of the Army, and he asked me what I was going to do, and I told him, well, I might try to get in that damn business you in. And we were riding in the car one day, and anyhow, he took me to New York. He wanted to make sure that his company knew what we were doing, and he explained to them I was going to start a publishing company, and got there okay. And we came back to Nashville, and I started a publishing company, and with Harold. Me and Harold had a little publishing company, and he turned me loose with that. And then he bought the barn about, I don't know how many years later, and turned it into a studio. And I would publish songs, and then I'd run up to the barn and do a session. And it's 20 miles from Nashville, so I'd go up there and do sessions. I stayed up there quite a lot. Me and a guy named Charley Talent. Charley was engineer that kept the equipment going, and anyhow, we got her going. And actually, it was about 2 years before my daddy ever came in there to record a record. We'd already had some international acts that had heard about us and came in. The Who was one. And Gordon Lightfoot from Canada came in. Oh, I don't know, it's 3 or 4 more, but anyhow, Kitty Wells was the first one that my dad brought in down there to record, and it wasn't because he suggested it. She had heard about it, and she came in and had her son-in-law to call us and book the studio. It was Kitty Wells who was the first act my dad had there. And the boys from Muscle Shoals, David Briggs, Norbert Putman, Jerry Kerrigan, those guys started coming up here and recording. And anyhow, that kind of kicked it off. And me and Charley, we were very, very busy. And I can remember, we didn't have backup men and all that. Charley either did the session or I did the session. And then I remember we get through at 2:00 in the morning, the other one come in, or one would go lay on the couch and sleep till 8:00 in the morning because we had a 10 ready to go at 10:00 in the morning. And that went on. I mean, those were long days, but we were in demand and had a lot of fun. I did that for, I guess, about 10 years. And then I went over to RCA and, Chet Atkins called me and I never did. I pitched Chet some songs, but I always leave him at his desk. But he called me one day and I had a funny feeling about that call. And yeah, I kind of thought he might have been going to offer me a job, and damn if he didn't. So, I was very excited about that. And so I left Bradley's Barn after 10, I think it was 10 years. It was either 10 or 13, I can't remember. But I went on over to RCA and met the challenges of many, many managers and artists and different personalities. But, I had learned a lot from my dad. If you had those ingredients and you put a good song with them, good song would show you the way that, it cost. I had a saying, he told me it costs just as much to cut a good song as it does a bad song. So that was kind of one of my rules. Let's get a good one. So that's kind of where I wound up. And I kind of said to myself, if RCA and all their salesmen and promotion men and the organization that they had, if they could sell a deck of records, I could make them what kind of sounded like a deck of record, because I had mixed all those sessions from my dad who ran Decca. So I made the records that I was taught how to make from my dad and found the best songs that I could, and kind of just a couple of guidelines that I tried to follow that he had taught me. He always had something to say that meant a lot. Because people tell me, I went to lunch with your dad. And I said, oh, really? I said, did you learn anything? What do you mean? I said, well, did he give you any advice or did you just miss it? And I said, if you listen to him, he'll give you a lot of good advice. So, and I believe that he did too. Yeah, I had fun doing it.
What would you say, from all the advice, all of the things that you learned from your father, the late Owen Bradley, what do you think the biggest lesson was that you learned?
Well, you're talking about from the record standpoint?
Really anything.
Well, I'll put it this way: from the record is finding a great song, which I mentioned earlier, and pretty much just say how it is, and tell the truth and tell them what you really believe, and be honest. That was one of the things I learned, and the music was really, once you found the songs, you had to get the people. And I had David Briggs from Muscle Shoals. I helped him move up to Nashville and paid him $50 a week. And I made $75. Got him all the session work that I could muster up for him, and we became good friends. And the rest of it, it's all about, the whole thing is all about finding a good song. It really, to me, that's where it is. And if you hang around with Nashville musicians, in a studio long enough, and you got a good song, it'll eventually cut itself. If you understand what I mean, just get a bunch of guys together and they start playing, and somewhere somebody's going to come up with a lick or come up with an intro or come up with something. But there were other people. There were other people that came in, and Los Angeles, I understand, is more like this, that they have everything written out. It's going to be this way, that way. Well, the way Nashville worked, you play the demo, and then you would turn it over to the musicians. They would make their chart, and off they'd go, and somebody would put together something, some lick or something in the record that you like, and you kind of kept that and built your record about that. I used this guy named David Briggs, who was a piano player. I depended on him a lot in the studio. I was more or less a coach because I'm not a musician. My dad played anything. I couldn't play a damn thing. I could play the radio if I could find the plug or if I had 4 new batteries. So, but I didn't try to hide it. I just got surrounded myself with the best musicians in Nashville and tried to find the best song I could.
I'm hoping you can tell us more about the legendary guitarist Chet Atkins. What was it like being around him?
Well, he didn't have much to say. I remember riding in the car one day with him going to lunch, and my dad could dress you down pretty good if you messed up. And so I kept waiting on Chet to tell me how I was doing. I wondered the same thing. We were going to a restaurant, and I asked Chet, I said, well, Chet, how am I doing? And he reared back and took a big drag off his cigar and looked at me and he said, you're doing all right. And that's all he said. I never asked him again. I went and I recorded some songs, and I said, well, I'll go play them for Chet. And I went and played them for Chet, and I had 4 songs, and he liked the first 2, and I liked the last 2. And I went back to my office, and I put my head on the desk, and I thought, what in the world am I going to do? He likes these 2. I don't like these 2. And I made the decision then that I needed to go with what I believed and not him. So he didn't really give me any opinion. I think Chet wanted to leave the minute I got there, and he just stayed, and he turned it all over to me. And he was, I never went to him asking him, what should I do in this situation or not. He didn't, I don't think he really cared. And somebody from New York came in. Well, I would sit and talk business to him, and Chet would take him to lunch. If that makes any sense to you, he was very quiet. He never gave me the type of advice or criticism as my dad did. Does that make any sense to you?
Yes, sir. I got you.
Yeah. Yeah, he just kind of let me do what I did, and I did what I did, and when it started happening, everybody liked it. I put it that way.
I've read about so many of the legendary recording acts and singers that you had the chance to witness making records, working in the studio. You mentioned a couple. You mentioned Gordon Lightfoot, The Who. I've also read about Loretta Lynn, Joan Baez.
Yeah.
Who would you say that you observed in the studio that you thought, wow, this is the most impressive example of raw talent I've ever seen?
Well, Loretta would have to be up there. Now, hell, I don't know if they had a good song. They all were. I think the public could judge who were the best. Ronnie Milsap, which I didn't record him, was probably one of the best. He was blind, and that means, a lot of blind people make up for it by hearing, and he was great. He was great. Loretta and her ability to write songs was great. I don't know. I recorded Dinah Shore. I had a lot of respect for her. I don't know. I say, we do good ones, we do bad ones. It's like publishing. We would publish good songs and bad songs. But, as long as they had a good song, I don't remember judging anybody that way, because, somebody could walk out of there with their tape and they may not have been the best singer, but they had a big hit, number one hit. And, the more you hear it on the radio, the more you think you did a good job, and they did a good job. So I never really looked at them, though. I had a lot of respect for them, I can tell you that, and had a lot of respect for the musicians, too. Like probably the most talented guy that I worked with, well, other than my dad, was that guy I told you a minute ago, David Briggs from Muscle Shoals. He played on all of Elvis's material once he played on the first sessions. But he was one of the most talented people that I think I worked with. And, Harold Bradley, they all were. I didn't hire them if they wasn't good or great.
Well, I'm glad you've mentioned David Briggs. For those who look and read the liner notes of albums, you can be assured that some of your favorite albums, you will see him credited there.
That's right. And a fine individual, too. He's I almost wouldn't do anything unless I had David. Anyhow, he was the captain of the sessions, but he was a very talented guy. He could go out and do a CMA show with a 20-piece band and then go in with 9 musicians and cut a hit all on the same day.
It occurs to me, with all the different acts you've had a chance to witness, and as I mentioned at the introduction, with you being the head of RCA Nashville, I'd really like to get your perspective on this. Why do some people make it in the music business and some people don't? Because I've had so many people, especially songwriters, they say, gosh, when I got to Nashville, I just thought, if these guys aren't making it, how am I going to make it? So why do some people make it?
Well, a lot of times they try to own all the songs and they don't cut good songs. You can cut a good song and still, a great song, and still not have a hit. Timing and the people you work with. I told Alabama when I signed them, you need a good booking agent, you need a good manager. And they didn't have either when they started. But, you need to surround yourself with good people and honest people. That's pretty much what I tell anybody. I helped Dean Dillon when he came. First thing I told Dean, I said, Dean, I'm going to try to help you. But I said, something's wrong with your name. Your name is Dean Rutherford. I said, is it Rutherford or Rutherford? He said, Rutherford. I said, nobody's going to say, here comes Dean Rutherford. I said, you need to change it. And he said, well, what do you want to change it to? I said, well, let's see. You need something that's easy to remember, like Bill Anderson, and got 2 L's in it, Bill. Brenda Lee. I said, what about the Old West? What about Dean, somebody from the Old West? And I threw the telephone book up on the desk. And I started through the D's, and I stopped at Dylan. I said, Dylan. Now, Dylan was a bad guy. Dylan was a robber, bank robber. I said, Dean Dylan. Now, that kind of, you remember that name. And he looked at me and he says, is that what you want to do? I said, well, I really think you ought to. So I named him Dean Dillon. And he went and changed his name and lived by Dean Dillon and was very successful. And in fact, he's a member. He got elected to the Member of Hall of Fame this year.
That's
and
right.
I called him. Yeah, I called him and congratulated him. He said, we just had a little chat about it. And he reminded me, he said, yeah, I remember you got the telephone book out and named me. So, it's just little things, but you got, and then he surrounded himself with a guy named Tom Collins, an honest, good publishing company. And then he came back over to me at A Cup Rose. He had to get at least one song in every George Strait album there was. But you just got to get good people, and you don't know it all. And, Waylon was, he wanted to fight. I got along great with Waylon, but, he'd like to send a message out that you got to do it your way, boys. You got to do it your way. So, well, I got news for you. The Outlaw album and Waylon and Willie's songs were my idea. It wasn't his. His manager didn't want to do them. But I did them anyhow because the contract said I could do them. Anyhow, I had good conversations with Waylon behind good stores, behind closed doors. Now, when you got him, a few of his buddies around him, and you just kind of took a slap on the cheek and moved on. But I understood that. It didn't bother me. The end result was very, very good for Waylon. When I left RCA, he was one of the few artists that called me. I was out in the garage working. My wife told me, she said, Waylon's on the phone. And I said, God, why don't they leave me alone? And I went up to the phone. I had a phone in the garage. I answered it, and he said, Hoss, said, if there's anything I can ever do for you, give me a call. And I remember that phone call like it was yesterday. And so I know he appreciated it, but when he talks to the press, it's funny to me.
When you look at your career, what would you say that you're the most proud of?
Probably the Hall of Fame. It went so fast. It really did. And you lived from number one to number one. I mean, and busted an artist. That's not the easiest thing in the world. But I'm proud of all of them. And I think the end result, the Hall of Fame, be considered to be in that thing with Harold and Owen and hell, Hank Williams, all of them. Anybody that's in there, I don't know how many. I meant to check when I was down there, and they're opening it back up. I need to go look at the wall because I worked with several of those people that are in there. I have no idea how many. I haven't counted them, but that's on my to-do list. But I work with a lot of those people, and but there's all different kind of ways to get there. But the easiest and the best way is the song is the easiest, in my opinion. So,
you keep going back to the importance of a great song, and you have to agree. I mean, songs are so important. No songs, no artists, no records. There's so many songs that you are associated with. So many. From your business dealings, from the artists that you've worked with. would it be possible to pick your favorite song of all time?
Well, here lately, I like, it's a Bill Anderson, Dean Dillon song, Just Give It Away by George Strait. That song's probably 4 years old. I don't know, but I wanted to put that one on my phone, called Just Give It Away. I like that song, guys. Hey, there's a whole lot of songs. I like one by Charley Pride called Burgers and Fries. It never was a big hit, but it sure sounds like a hit to me for somebody. I'm not real sure who, but I love that song. And Waylon, God Almighty, I love to hear Waylon Jennings. I got all of it. I was trying to help develop. I wasn't trying to help develop. I was developing an image for Waylon, and I remember getting all of his album covers out and laying them on the floor and looking at them, and then cull out the ones that didn't fit his image, and tried to then talk to my art director to tell him what I was trying to do. But little things like that. And, what am I trying to say? The Alabama, I was looking for a group. There was no group. There were the Statler brothers, but there was no band group. Charlie Daniels and his band was a group, but I wanted a group's name, and I put the word out on the street. I'm looking for a group. And a couple of people bought me a group, but then I heard Alabama on the radio, and I think it was Randy Owen in Alabama. And I called Harold Shedd, and I told Harold Shedd that to bring me a tape. He said, "You already got one." And I looked around, and I found one that he'd already sent. I played it, and I told him to come over. I wanted to sign him. And I said, I'm looking for a group name. I'd like to get rid of Randy Owen and Alabama, just Alabama. Because disc jockeys weren't playing. If they'd play Porter Wagner, Dolly, Charley Pride, Statler Brothers, but they didn't have a group's name. And so I thought Alabama would fit right in there. It gives the disc jockey something else to play. And the disc jockey was changing. The disc jockey, he was driving a Cadillac or a brand new pickup truck. He wasn't into his older model used car, and I forget what you call it, not a seersucker suit, but he was beginning to dress sporty. The image of the disc jockey was changing, and I took notice of that. And I thought, music's changing, and that was one of the reasons that I signed Alabama. And I think I was right, really. So, I gave it a lot of thought. But I saw the music changing. I saw the disc jockey change. And I saw a void in what they were picking to play. So, it just kind of happened. Plus, they cut down, don't get me wrong, they cut some great songs. So that's kind of how it happened.
Well, Mr. Bradley, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on the show. I always like to give the guest the microphone at the end. And this isn't limited to music. It could be about anything. What would you say to anybody who is tuned in?
Well, get a mask. I hate to say it, but I'm kind of worried about this. And, I'm not 20 years old no more, so I'm concerned about that. But listen to the music, accept the change in the music, because I think my dad wrestled with some of the changes that I took part in the music. but we never argued about it. But I kind of admire some of the conversations that we had, and I later on realized that he was changing with the music that my generation made. So anyhow, I just keep in tune to satellite radio. You'll do just fine because they got it on there.
Well, Mr. Bradley, I hope we have the chance to speak again someday. Who knows, maybe when all this pandemic is over, it'll be in person. But I really appreciate you being a guest on the Paul Leslie Hour.
Well, I appreciate it, Paul. I enjoyed it.
All right, sir. Well, thank you again, and until next time.
Get a good song. That's all I can say.
Wise advice.